Now today's shop project, we're going to work on our FZR 1000. This is a 1991 and it's due for a set of spark plugs. So it's a very, very simple job, except for one thing. You do need a kind of a unique plug wrench with a joint in it to get the end plugs out. There's a couple of tricks that I think you'll find really valuable if you've never done it before, like getting the coils out of the way conveniently. It'll make the job not only a lot easier, it'll make it that you can do it. And some of the things I've learned the hard way on pulling this bike apart, and the quick disconnect fuel line, for instance. And I've used this bike for a track bike for many, many years, and for a street bike many, many years. I have enjoyed every minute of owning this bike, and I want to maintain it and keep it just as new as I possibly can. So today our shop project is going to be, we're going to get a new set of plugs in the FZR. Luciano's got his FZR already out on the road riding around. We want to get ours running as close to the razor edge as we can, and a new set of plugs will help do that. So do you guys want to help me work on the FZR? Come on, do you want to help me? I could use a little help. I didn't think so. These guys are never available when you need a hand, or you need a fin, I should say. So because our FZR was a track bike for a good part of its years, and then it was a Ferrari bike, and then it was a track bike again. So we're pretty familiar with how to take it apart, get it put together, and do the general maintenance on it. And today, our goal is we're going to get a new set of spark plugs in it, and I think that'll just get it running just a little bit crisper, so we go for these rides with Luciano. They'll be a lot more fun when we switch bikes. So the first step is 2 screws hold the seat on, and the bike comes apart very quick, very easily. It's made to, I guess, because they were using these as race bikes. Taking it apart, relatively straightforward. After getting those 2 bolts off, relatively straightforward to get the seat off. Now I always have the safety latch on this with 2 zip ties. I'm just always afraid that these things really don't hold the way they should, but they've never come loose yet. But I always put a safety zip tie on each one. 1 bolt in the back, there's a pin in the front, an overflow fuel line, and some wires that go up under the tank, and we'll be able to pull the tank right off. Now it's a real handy thing if right now the tank were half empty. This is a little more than half full, so at least you get a little free exercise. Just get the overflow line off, get that out of the way, and we're going to jack the back of the tank up with a rubber hammer. Well, what the rubber hammer does is allow us to get our teeny little fingers down there at the fuel line quick disconnect. And that's the thing with Luciano and I have on all the track bikes, just so you can disconnect the fuel line conveniently. Boy, has that paid for itself over the years. That really is more convenient than dripping all the gas and trying to get it off and onto the fuel pump. This is worth its weight in gold. So the last thing, the little pin in the front, is a little pin and a cotter pin that holds it on, and we will be ready to pull the tank. And when there's a lot of fuel in the tank and you pull this pin, it really drops right down. We're pretty good right now. Okay, so we're ready right now to take the tank off. And it really is handy if you don't have the tank full right now. Now this is just a little habit that I have from working on more complex things than this. I put the parts in the order I took them off the bike, and with the tools that I need to put them back. And on a complex job, having the parts in reverse order when you're done can be a big advantage. Simple job like this, it just doesn't hurt. All right, next thing is to pull the airbox off. Relatively straightforward again. Then we'll be down to get down at the belly of the beast. There's 1 10mm nut that has to come off in the front, and then the center Phillips screw. Once they're off, the airbox will pull right up. Now for a really old bike with a lot of miles on it, we try to keep this nice and clean, so on a day like today it's easy to work on. Now what has to happen, we have to pull the coils out. Once you get the coils out, it's easy to get down at the plugs. Now this bike has some modified things on it where the wiring and the cable, the throttle cables go. I have a little bit different than stock, but basically the whole thing boils down to get this, to get to the plugs, you have to remove this plate. There's 3 screws hold it on. Once we get that out of the way, we have to kind of jiggle it around. It's a little tricky doing it, but once you do it once or twice, it goes pretty fast. So once you get the coils off, and pretty self-explanatory, there's 4 screws, you can pull this plastic piece out, this air dam. Once the coils are out, you can get right down at the plugs. So it's this air dam that really makes it difficult, and I have even written on here with a marker to remind myself, because I only do this every couple of years, to remove that just to make it easy to get at the plugs. So once I'm down in there, now I need a special wrench to get in there and get the plugs out, but each cylinder of course is marked, so it's kind of impossible to get them backwards. And these clips, you have to disconnect the clips to get that piece out. Well, they really only go in one way, but it's a good idea to mark them if you think there's any chance you'd get it wrong. So now one by one, we're just going to take the plugs out. I do one at a time and put the new plug in, so there's no chance I crisscross my hands. And this is the tool. It's got a little joint in it. I put safety wire in there just so that nothing drops down into the engine. And there's our first used plug coming out. Well, there's nothing nicer than having a fresh set of plugs in the bike. So one by one, changing them out, kind of simple. You just move the coils around, get this out of the way for the other side. And when we get done with this, the reverse order, and that's why I put the things out on a rag, and the order I take them off, it's a reverse order. Relatively simple and straightforward. Now the whole thing that makes this job easier, or even that you can do it any way, is to have that wrench with the joint in it and get those coils out of the way. And when you're all done, of course, it's just a reverse order, putting it all back together. Alright, so the first cylinder is basically done. Make sure we have the plug wire on snug, and we're ready to move on to the next cylinder. Of course, the middle cylinders are a little bit easier to do than the end one. The 2 end ones, you really have to get in there. 2 middle ones are relatively easy. We get these done, and this will just be, I'll be really feeling good about the whole summer riding, knowing I got fresh plugs in it. Remember, this bike has a jet kit in it and aftermarket exhaust, so it's really not a stock bike. And you pretty much, by looking at the plugs that come out, you can tell the bike is running on the rich side. Always good if you have a track bike that it is running a little on the rich side too. And from this point on, it's pretty straightforward, just moving all the stuff from the other side over here. I don't want to get the video making it too long. Move the stuff over, do the plugs on the other side. It just couldn't be easier from this point on. Now it's amazing, once you get started doing this, it goes pretty quick, and the second or third time you do it, even quicker. So having that wrench with the joint in it just makes this job go so much easier. I don't know if you could even do it if you didn't have that wrench with the joint. So the next step with all the plugs in is to get the coils attached to the air dam. It's easier if you put the air dam in first and then put the bolts in the coils, and then make sure, of course, all the wires are on, and then connect. There's 2 of these have to be reconnected, and we should be ready to go. Now I like to line everything up, make sure I got everything snapped together, everything's lined up before I put any of the screws in. And once we get this in place, there we go. And we're ready to just put screws in now. Now a little idiosyncrasy of this FZR, and maybe other years too. When I got the bike, of course it was a wreck, it was in pretty bad shape. It did run, but Luciano had to do a lot of work on it, especially the carburetors were leaking like a sieve. Thank you, Luciano, for straightening all that out, and I know he straightened his FZR out too, but there's a quirk with these bikes that if you don't know about it can really be frustrating. Let me get this out of the way, I don't want to forget to do these. That if you disconnect the servo motor, see this has an aftermarket exhaust, and what happened is no EXUP valve. So what happens is the EXUP valve, when it's not connected, if you take the wires off, the bike will only run to about 4,000 RPM and then shuts itself off. So we didn't know that in the beginning. We had to do a little research, but I'll pass that information on. If you're an FZR guy, you don't want to disconnect. It doesn't matter if the servo you can take the cables off and the servo will turn. When I'm running the bike, the servo is turning, but the cables aren't hooked to anything. But once you disconnect that, somehow the bike does not rev the way it normally does, up to about 4,000 and just shuts off. That's a really good tip if you're an FZR guy. Now this is one of the other little problems with this bike, is because I've rerouted the throttle cable. I have a couple things here that tend to rub on each other over time. So I always get a zip tie, maybe 2 zip ties here, just to keep things from getting too out of hand. Everything's nice and straight. Throttle cable, that's good. Cheap insurance. There's just one final check that I didn't forget to do anything or leave anything unconnected. And we're ready to put the airbox on. It's important to get the screws torqued down, as this airbox rides in rubber, and getting these joints here with the clamps that they really get a good bite on the carburetor. It doesn't leak air there. Okay, with the tank up with a rubber hammer, you snap that quick disconnect on, put the bolt in the back. Pretty self-explanatory. Seat, a couple of bolts in the back, and we should be ready to call this a day. And one more little detail: with that snapped, we got to do the overflow line next. Alright, so this buttons this up. This is roughly a 2-hour job to change the plugs, for me anyway. Now this is my little safety zip tie here, that just in case I don't trust that mechanism. This is really just overkill having these zip ties, but I figure what the heck, it only takes a second to do it. Getting this all lined up can be a little time consuming and tricky, but we'll get it. Lining up the seat is always trickier than I think it is, but because everything it's just a little bit different than the way a stock seat would be. I have a way of mounting this that seemed to work pretty good, but we're coming up on the end of this job, and boy, I'm happy it's gone as well as it has. And we're going to be ready for the big FZR day coming up soon, hopefully. I love going on rides where both people have exactly the same bike, and well, Luciano's is very similar to this. Both of these bikes are made from parts. I've had this bike probably for 10 years, 9 or 10 years. 900-hour restoration. It's been 3 separate bikes: the bike I bought, the Ferrari bike, and now this bike. And every one of them, the one thing they have in common, they have been fun to ride. That's always the test of if it's worth having a bike or worth restoring it. So I hope your device was able to play this in 4K or the high resolution anyway. We spent a lot of time with this motorcycle in the last 10 years, and it's always been a great bike. I never regret the time I spent working on it, and thank you, Luciano, for all the help you have been over the years. But it is just, we're going to get together hopefully with the 2 FZRs pretty soon, and we're going to try to have some real fun. But that may be coming up very, very soon. And thanks so much for watching.